Hello and welcome to Lamestream, a show that guides you through the crisis in media and how it's impacting everything. I'm Osman Faruqi. I'm here with my co-host Scott Mitchell. Scott, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great, Scott. Do you remember towards the end of our time living together, we got really into this reality TV show, The Traitors? You remember that period?
I would say, Oz, that maybe our period watching Traitors was like foundational in the formation of Lamestream. We were both still at our old jobs. I think it coincided with the period where we were getting pretty over working for big media companies. We were getting towards the sort of tail end of our time doing that. And we really locked in on this show every weeknight for about 3 weeks. We got through, I would say, Australian Traitors Season 1, one of the most underrated seasons of reality TV of the last 10 years. It really didn't capture the public, but it is an incredible season of reality TV.
I mean, totally agree. And just so classically Australian that the show kind of went nowhere in Australia, but in the US, it's gone on to win like Emmys, and in the UK, it is just reaching height after height. The reason why I bring it up is because, I mean, I had a great time watching that show with you. I sort of forgot that existed for a bit, but I've jumped back on board with the most recent season of the UK Traitors, which just wrapped up like a week ago.
Yep.
It is elite level reality television, and just like a bit of a primer for people. Maybe people are familiar with the party game Mafia or Werewolf. The idea is basically a bunch of people go live in like this castle. Some of them are picked as being traitors, and it is their job to try to quote unquote kill one of the other guests, who are called the Faithful. Every night, the Faithful have got to figure out who the traitors are. It's like the social game from Survivor, basically turned up to 100. And I think one of the reasons why the show was so good, unlike so many other reality shows, there's obviously like editing and stuff that goes on, but there's no like massive production influence. There isn't like the villain edit. There isn't like an attempt to get all of these people drunk and cause drama like you see with shows like Maths and The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, for example. It's just a bunch of like very normal English people. Some of them are quite smart. Some of them are very dumb, talking to each other for a long time, trying to figure out who is trying to kill them. It's great stuff. And if people haven't jumped on board, it's a really, really entertaining and like low stakes show to have on at this time of year, I reckon.
So I should check out the latest season?
I think the British season, the most recent UK season is great. There's just great characters and just some of the best twists and game playing I have seen on this show.
I feel like the thing that I love about it is because it's a trust game. Unlike a lot of reality TV, the casting in most reality TV, they cast kind of the people who are set up from the beginning to be a bit nuts or villains or whatever. And then there's the heroes, and those storylines usually play out as predicted, as the producers produced it. Because the contestants on Traitors are being put in under all this pressure over who to trust at all times, the people who like are maybe the good guys going in, or the people who are pegged as the villains, sort of everyone ends up having moments of heroism or craziness, and you really can't predict it. I mean, the season we watched together, having Australia's longest held hostage, Nigel Brennan, cast on that show, and him lying to everyone and just saying he was like a dairy academic. No, I think he said he was
a janitor at universities. It was amazing.
Yeah, I thought he was like a pasteurization academic. Anyway, whatever he was, amazing stuff. So good.
It's great stuff. It's great stuff. All right, Scott, coming up on today's episode of Lamestream, there's some pretty intense scenes across the country on Monday as a divided but still pretty emboldened far-right movement took to the streets in support of Australia Day and in opposition to the Invasion Day marches. It was another display of how normalized white nationalism has become in our current political conversation. We will discuss those rallies and why media coverage of the far right remains relatively muted despite outright displays of anti-Semitism and what looks like an attempted terror attack in Perth. Later in the show, we'll take a look at Karl Stefanovic's foray into podcasting. Welcome to the club, my man, and what it tells us about the state of Australian media. Plus, in keeping tabs, look at how dubious social media content creators are feasting on the Blake Lively controversy, and a look at the ABC's confusing entertainment strategy. All of that coming up on the show.
Jam-packed this week, Oz. But before we get into all of that, a reminder for everyone that the best way to support this show and us making this podcast is to become a subscriber. Not only do you get access to all of our articles on our website, exclusive reporting, analysis, our weekly newsletter, you can also listen to this podcast ad-free on the website if you're a subscriber, and you'll be the first to hear about our live events. Plus, we have some exciting new subscriber-only offers we'll be announcing very soon. So get on board now. Head to lamestream.com.au to support independent media.
Scott, on Monday this week, I went along to the Melbourne Invasion Day rally in the city. This year, I was particularly interested in the turnout at the rally, especially because the Nine papers had published this poll that showed an increasing number of Australians actually were supporting keeping January 26th as Australia Day. It's a big shift in the last few years. Back in 2023, 39% of people wanted to change the date. That figure has now collapsed to just 16%, according to this poll. Meanwhile, 68% of people want to keep Australia Day on January 26th. And that was one poll, but there was also research published by Deakin University that showed a pretty similar result. It showed that those who want to keep Australia Day on January 26th had actually hardened their view in the last few years. Well, the Melbourne rally was pretty big. I think the estimates were around 20,000 people, so roughly the same as the numbers in Sydney, and there were decent-sized rallies at all the other capital cities as well. And I guess the takeaway from that is, even as there is this broader shift in the political mood to the right, there is still this strong contingent of people who are willing to get active and willing to spend the public holiday at rallies like this in Melbourne or at the Yarbun Festival in Sydney.
Yeah, on this momentum for changing the date and the swing in that, it's actually stunning to me, Oz. You know, like a few years ago, this felt like something that had so much momentum behind it. Every year the Invasion Day rallies were bigger, the popular support for changing the date ticked up. Every year, some major cultural figure was the latest to come out and declare they supported changing the date. And, you know, there was one point where, you know, one of the things that brought down a chair of the ABC for political interference was Triple J changing the date of the Hottest 100 in kind of defiance of the pressure that he as chair was bringing down on them. And in 2022, you know, I remember when Albanese won that election, I actually was covering the victory party. And when he was the first prime minister to start an election night speech with talking about Indigenous Australians, it felt like a real moment. I just mention this because I think from our vantage point today, to see that polling this week and the trend it's going in, it's actually like one of the starkest, saddest, and I think most illustrative examples of the cultural shift to the right that we've seen over several years and actually started long before this current moment of One Nation rising in the polls. It just points to the danger of this and sort of stunning to see turn around.
Yeah, I wonder whether in time we'll come to see the voice referendum as sort of like a Brexit moment, right? Just in terms of everyone in kind of like the media and political space thinks they're going in a certain direction, but then when you give like most Australians an opportunity to express their political view on a pretty straightforward proposition, you find out that actually, no, those people are not where you thought they were. And interesting you bring up the Prime Minister's speech in 2022 where he talked about the referendum and, as you said, opened with it. You contrast that to how little he or the government talk about anything to do with Indigenous affairs now. I think you're spot on that that is a really interesting case study of just how little governments and political parties want to talk about these issues. I mean, there are lots of grassroots Indigenous-led activist groups that are still fighting every single day, but it is pretty clear that kind of the more mainstream institutions have become a bit too scared to talk about anything in this space post that referendum. Scott, as well as the Invasion Day rallies, there were, and this is more worrying, pretty large March for Australia rallies across the country as well. In Sydney and Melbourne, they each attracted an estimated 2,000 people. The Brisbane crowds, slightly smaller than that. They were addressed, though, by Pauline Hanson, the leader of One Nation. And there is this tendency from some progressives to look at the numbers of those two rallies, the 20,000 strong for Invasion Day and the 2,000 for March for Australia, and dismiss them and say, well, we've got the numbers. They're still pretty on the fringes. I think it still is a huge warning sign that thousands of Australians are now marching openly at anti-immigration protests regularly and often, and in this case, definitely shoulder to shoulder with neo-Nazis as well. I'm just not sure it's a great comparison to say, oh, there's still a bit less than the Invasion Day protests that have been going on for more than a decade or decades now. I just kind of think we need to be cautious about dismissing neo-Nazi rallies of thousands of people.
I think the March for Australia rallies this week are a difficult one to nail with a kind of appropriate nuance. I will say, I was genuinely relieved when I saw the first photos of the crowds and those official counts come through, because I think there was a point a couple of months ago where March for Australia was really aiming for the 26th to be even bigger than the first March for Australia. It was supposed to be a huge coming out party for, among other things, the neo-Nazis, white Australia political party, and it seemed like a lot of planning, organizing was going into making these huge. So to see them not get those numbers was a relief in some ways. But part of the reason for that is over summer, it appears that basically a bunch of infighting wrecked those plans, mostly over how closely organizers were going to work with neo-Nazi NSN members, and organizationally the whole thing seems to have gone into a bit of a tailspin and hurt the momentum and turnout. But at the same time, I agree with you. I mean, even if they were smaller than the first March for Australia rallies, it still makes them the second biggest far-right rallies in Australian history, probably. And you look at the content of the speeches, listen to interviews with people attending, it is full-on white supremacist ideology out in the open proudly, and it is still a huge risk that it is drawing more and more people into that ideology.
Yeah. The fact that they are still drawing thousands of people despite all those splits, despite the fact that in some states they're trying to distance themselves from the neo-Nazis, in other states the neo-Nazis are essentially orchestrating the whole thing. I like the right in Australia, kind of like the left, it's notorious for splitting and not really being able to be cohesive. It takes a lot to mobilize thousands of people to explicitly talk about anti-immigration and white supremacist ideas. That's kind of, I think, the main thing that I want to get across is don't get too excited that the Invasion Day rallies were still bigger. I think what shocked me, Scott, beyond the numbers, I'm not even shocked is not the right word, because I'm not really surprised. I more just mean disturbed or distressed because of how significant and I guess kind of scary this language is. The things that were being said were some of the most blatant displays of white supremacy and anti-Semitism that I think we've seen in public places, at public rallies in Australia. In Sydney, a man wearing Nazi symbols spoke at the March for Australia rally. He expressed support for very prominent neo-Nazis like Joel Davis and Thomas Sewell, and he delivered an extremely incendiary speech that was just stacked with anti-Semitic language after anti-Semitic language. Here is a little bit of that speech.
The Jews are the greatest enemy to this nation. They always have been. They're an enemy to Western civilization, and for thousands of years, Christians and Anglos, the white man has known that the Jew is our greatest enemy.
What's more shocking, Scott, than hearing that is hearing the cheers in the crowd, right? This is not just a guy who's wandered in out of nowhere. He's speaking to either people who already agree with him because they're part of the neo-Nazi movement, or people who are convinced by what he's trying to say. That's what a lot of these protests are about. They're about pushing people who might just have vague anti-immigration ideas into the far right. This idea that these protests are just these benign demonstrations of people who are a little bit worried about housing prices and the state of the economy, I think we can safely say that is a total joke. These are now white supremacist, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi rallies. And what I'm finding remarkable is that after 2 years of a very relentless focus on the anti-Semitism crisis in Australia, which we've covered, pretty much exclusively been waged by the right wing in Australian media and politics against the left wing. Now we have one of the worst examples of public anti-Semitism, and the response has been pretty muted from those same actors. This particular individual who gave that speech has been arrested, but it doesn't seem like there's been anywhere near the kind of political or media fervor that we've seen after events like the Opera House protest in Sydney after October 7, for example. Or basically, every time the pro-Palestine movement would have a rally in Melbourne, the Age would completely wet itself and say these things like, this is the most anti-Semitic events we've ever seen in this city. Like, the real anti-Semitic threat, as we and others have been saying, has always been the far right and neo-Nazis. But because Australian media and politicians have been willing to ignore that and instead use it as this cudgel to attack those who want to criticize Israel, they now look, I think, pretty stupid, because we've got really scary, violent stuff happening on the streets aimed at minorities, whether they're migrants, Muslims, or the Jewish community, and they don't really know how to handle it.
Yeah. When these really disgusting things are being said to crowds of hundreds and crowds of thousands, you do not see the immediate press conferences held, the statements issued. There's not a lot. I think it has improved a tiny bit, mostly since the New South Wales government got caught last year completely flat-footed and basically ignoring the NSN rallies out the front of state parliament, and they copped a lot of media attention for that and scrutiny. So I think when it comes to, say, arrests and those kind of things, I think you're seeing a bit of recognition of the threat of this stuff. When it comes to the media, though, Oz, I do have to say that it's pretty bizarre to me that there are really only two groups of journalists in the whole country who are exposing the far right and exposing these elements of it. You've basically got Matt Martino and Michael Workman at the ABC, who seem to be doing this largely on their own. On the weekend before these rallies, they reported a bunch on how March for Australia organisers behind closed doors were endorsing the neo-Nazis, funneling people towards joining the NSN's attempt to register as a political party, doing Heil Hitler salutes. Obviously, in that time, the NSN basically disbanded, preemptively trying to make sure that they couldn't be charged under the new hate group laws. But, just bookmarking that and that report for the next time anyone tells a listener that these rallies aren't far right, the organisers are behind the scenes, or a bunch of them, doing Heil Hitler salutes. And then you've got Sharon Grotch at the Nine newspapers, and she's the other person doing this reporting. She did a story this last weekend exposing links between the now officially, at least, defunct NSN and these global far-right terror groups, including Atomwaffen, who have shut up shop now, but an insane apocalyptic Nazi terrorist group, Oz. Super concerning. This is the kind of group that wanted to blow up nuclear power plants across Europe and the US, and the Australian NSN had links with them. This is good reporting, Oz. But when it comes to the high-profile coverage, we still see this, what's the deal? Who are the wacky Nazis? Are the protests really racist? Who's to say? When you have organized groups of men at these rallies holding signs and chanting to let a leader of the NSN out of jail, Joel Davis. Those placards were everywhere. I heard a number of chants in different cities at these rallies. You've got, the Victorian president of One Nation knew that white supremacists were speaking, told the ABC he was assured they wouldn't speak. He was very confused about all this, but then got up on stage with them anyway, shared the mic, spoke, did not draw a line of not being associated with those people. It just screams out to me, all of this, for there to be more resources put into exposing this. The fact that it's down to 2 sets of journalists in the entire country to do it on their own is crazy to me.
Yeah, and that ABC story that you mentioned, I mean, that was, as well as the numbers at the rallies, they had a lot of kind of photos and evidence of just how many meetings and they had so many photos of meetings taking place across the country, of recruitment events. And there's a lot of people now taking part in neo-Nazi movements and organizations. It's the biggest they've ever been. It's crazy to me, Scott, this question of, why aren't more journalists covering it? 10 years ago, you were there, right? When the ABC trying to make the case as to why this stuff should be covered, and editors and producers saying, nah, it's not a real issue. Now the neo-Nazi movement in Australia and around the world is the biggest it's been since, the end of World War II, and still it just doesn't seem like it's been given the priority that it deserves. The other pretty massive story, Scott, out of these March rallies that I don't think has gotten anywhere near enough attention is this attempted bombing of the Perth Invasion Day protest. A 31-year-old man has been charged after throwing a device containing a mixture of volatile and potentially explosive chemicals that also contained nails and metal ball bearings. That device, Scott, is generally known as an improvised explosive device or a bomb.
Yeah.
This is really, really extraordinary. Like, thankfully, it did not go off, but if it had, it was flung from like a walkway above the crowd into the crowd of 2,500 people. You can imagine that potentially killing or injuring a lot of people. And kind of like the example of the speech in Sydney that was so anti-Semitic, this is obviously a separate, potentially violent incident. The reaction to this is similarly weird. Police have charged the individual with committing an act with intent to harm, as well as charging him with making or possessing explosives under suspicious circumstances. No terror charges, which feels very odd after the nature of the incident, but also after the police minister in WA said the incident had the potential to be a mass casualty event. Okay, well, we're not really talking about it as that. Like, you could probably walk down the street and ask someone randomly, did you know that someone tried to bomb the Invasion Day rally in Perth? And they would look at you like you're a crazy person. It's weird to me that this incident hasn't attracted more coverage, more attention in the coverage, or more political debate. The Prime Minister was asked about this incident, and he was also pretty mild in his commentary. He just said that the individual involved should have the book thrown at him. And, there may be people that say, well, look, it's before the courts, you can't get too red hot about this stuff. Understandable. I can totally agree with that sort of general instinct, but let me tell you, that does not stop politicians or the media in so many other cases of alleged terrorism saying all sorts of, pretty out there things if the perpetrators fit a particular kind of mold. And again, Scott, all of this feels so restrained compared to other examples that we've seen in the last couple of years. I mean, in particular, what stood out to me is, remember the furor that kicked off with the Dural caravan bomb hoax? Like, police knew that was fake, but that still sparked this incredible, insane political and media outcry. This is not a hoax. This is a real alleged incident, and we are seeing nowhere near that level of outrage.
Yeah, it is so restrained. I saw it sort of sandwiched into reports about protests all around the country as kind of a interesting fact halfway through the story. And yeah, we have to be careful legally, but an attempt to bomb a crowd of Australians on January 26, I mean, if this was not a crowd of Indigenous people and progressive activists, but, a different sort of demographic, I'm pretty confident the whole country would have stopped. Like, this would be an Olympus has fallen moment, like commemorative editions. I also think, just to, one lighter note on this is West Australians. Obviously, I love our West Australian friends, Oz, but a lot of the time there's a lot of frustration among West Australians that stories that happen in the West don't get treated with the national significance that they deserve. I just point out the West Australian, Kerry Stokes's West Australian newspaper, this story did make their front page, but it wasn't the main story today. It was instead, I had sex with a 12-year-old student, guilty as charged, teacher confesses. So that's the big story from the West Australian, not the attempted bombing of a protest.
Yeah, sorry, Perth people, don't get mad at us that your media establishment is run by one crazy right-wing billionaire, unlike the rest of our media establishments. Scott, to me, this whole thing is like another case study of how and when the media choose to run like so dead in that classic example you just gave on a story, or when they choose to make it their relentless focus. They can push the political conversation in a certain direction. They can push governments into passing new laws, which they've done multiple times over the past couple of years. In this instance, that certainly won't happen. In this instance, most people probably don't even know this occurred. But even if it's not being covered by the media, the facts are still the facts, right? White supremacists continue to march, continue to be more bold and radical, continue to threaten, and in some instances, try to commit acts of violence. That is really scary, regardless of how little it is reported.
Yeah, Oz. I mean, I think the interesting thing about this week is that with the neo-Nazi NSN kind of going to ground, regrouping, figuring out what exactly it's going to do next, I think the real political beneficiary of all of this stuff around Jan 26 has been One Nation. They got a lot of coverage on the day and in the lead up to it. We gave quite a long time to Paul Sakal at the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald's interview with Barnaby Joyce in our Monday episode, but I have to say I was shocked at the ABC's 7:30 on Tuesday night, where Adam Harvey, their reporter, even more friendly and deferential to Barnaby Joyce and One Nation, and that's Oz with the ability to edit and script to give context. Like, that's a safety net that a live interviewer doesn't have. And I just had to play this as we begin to talk about the political fallout of all of this, because I couldn't believe this is where the ABC is at.
Oh, I just thanked him for hopefully going to save our generation, because I know at the moment our country's being run by a bunch of idiots.
Here in Tamworth, support for One Nation doesn't feel like a passing fad, one that'll rise and fall from the charts like a one-hit wonder. The convictions here are deeply held that the major political parties are ignoring the most basic concerns, like crumbling services and the rising cost of homes. Issues that for many voters are directly linked to too much immigration.
Stunning stuff, Oz. I think if anyone thinks I'm taking that out of context and the pushback must have been just about to start after that, the report ends shortly after that with a slow-mo shot of a woman throwing her arms around Barnaby Joyce and embracing him. Slow-mo to just let us feel the emotion of the punters.
Who knew that
Barnaby.
Putting ex-Channel 9 people in charge of the ABC, from the very top to executive producers of so many of their current affairs programs, might lead to like really shit reporting at very critical moments. It's really, really sad, as you say, that this is where the ABC is at right now.
Totally. Setting Barnaby aside, Pauline Hanson has really been getting a hell of a lot of press, both going into Jan 26 and coming out of it. The media appearance that was timed for maximum effect and to generate probably the most clicks was from a newcomer to independent media. I'm talking, of course, about Carlos Stefanovic, Oz. We have to talk about Carl's new venture.
Sure. We do? Okay.
I think we do. I mean, I'm excited to. You might.
I mentioned it in the introduction, so we have to talk about it now, don't we?
Since we started this podcast, Oz, there's been a massive growth in independent media outlets, and now we have one of the big dogs who's joined our ranks. He has launched his own YouTube channel, The Karl Stefanovic Show, and in pre-press he cited Joe Rogan as an inspiration for it. It is completely separate from his employer, Nine, and really this is independent. It is Karl unplugged, not that he's particularly plugged when he's on air at Nine. I mean, the hair might be plugged. That could be plugged. I don't know.
Shots fired at Karl Stefanovic's hairline. Incredible.
It looks good. I think they did.
It looks fine, dude. He looks like the Lego Man. It's crazy.
But Oz, what did you think of this announcement to see the highest paid talent in Australian television launch a YouTube channel and go all in, and then to kick it off with an interview with Pauline Hanson? It's pretty interesting media moment.
It's a very interesting media moment. We'll get into the Pauline Hanson stuff in a second, but to me, this screamed of someone like Karl, who has been a key part of Australian TV for such a long time, basically saying TV is dying. I've got to jump ship onto the nearest life raft as soon as possible. I think he's realized that, look, there's still a decent TV audience there for him, even though it's significantly less than what it was like years ago. How do I convert that into a new channel that I control and get off the sinking ship that is breakfast television? That is my interpretation of what he's doing here. It's not unique. Like in the US, we've seen a lot of TV presenters launch their podcast, use their audience to kind of get it off the ground, then jump ship. And it's beneficial for them because, they make more money directly, like they own that brand. Hosting a podcast, can take a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but hosting one weekly interview show like Karl is doing is a lot less work than waking up at 3 a.m. every morning to host breakfast TV 5 days a week. I think if you're Channel 9, this all looks pretty grim. Like, you're paying this guy millions of dollars to host your flagship breakfast morning show, and he is using that to launch an independent podcast where he's essentially trying to take your audience and monetize it for himself. I mean, Nine has a podcast division, Scott. Nine makes all sorts of podcasts. It's pretty remarkable that, one, he's not making it with them, and two, Nine is letting him do this. It shows, I think, where the balance of power lies. And if I was a Nine podcast producer or just someone who worked on TV at Nine, I'd be pretty annoyed that Karl was doing this. The fact that he's launching the product with Hanson, I think, is pretty telling. It pretty clear where Karl wants to position himself. You mentioned he's been comparing himself to Joe Rogan. He sees clearly what he thinks is a gap on the right in Australia. His next guest is the MMA fighter Alex Volkanovski. So he really is trying hard to kind of capture that manosphere market alongside that kind of far right market. And launching with Pauline, it is a statement.
Yeah, on the choice of Hanson, Oz, Karl has a long history with her. He's clashed with her. He's given her a lot of airtime, particularly when she was a regular on the Today Show for many, many years. And clearly, I think this choice suggests he thinks that she's a ratings winner. The debut episode, even Michael Adado at the Nine newspapers who had to review this, was clearly trying to be honest, despite the fact he's writing about the network's biggest star and probably can't go too hard. I found it pretty funny reading between the lines of his review where he called the debut patchy viewing and said at times it risked being a free kick for Hanson. I mean, I'll go further. It was a free kick for Hanson.
Totally.
This episode is so full of waffling. The audio is terrible. But I'm actually going to play a moment where I think Karl is actually trying to do a serious bit of interviewing, because I think that's a better thing to judge. This is him asking Pauline about Gina Reinhardt and her support of the party. And this is about as tough as it gets.
I tell people, no one, not Mrs. Reinhardt, no one pulls my strings.
You know, she just lives down the road from me. She's got a nicer pad than me in Noosa, but she's never invited me over.
Well, does that tell you something? You better get your act together, mate.
I'm trying, Pauline. I just want one of her steaks. Is she donating to the? Is that part of the record, or what does she want out of it? Is the thing, because people, they always assume if someone's a billionaire and they've got money to roll and they want influence. What is it?
Not influence. It's back in her country.
That is a tough moment, Oz. Gina's a good chick, place down the road from me in Noosa. Is she pulling the strings? No, okay, sorted. Dunzo. Cleared that up. What a ride this interview was.
I can't believe we've got so many examples of these sycophantic interviews across the mainstream, and I guess now we've got to call Karl the independent media. Like, at one point in that interview, Karl literally asks Pauline to look down the barrel of the camera dead on and say, I'm Pauline Hanson and I want to be Prime Minister. I mean, Pauline Hanson, for whatever reason, says, I'm not going to do that. Maybe that's a smart move from her. But the fact that she was asked by Karl to do that is amazing. Like, another platform where this party and this person are getting the cruisiest run of all time. Like, I can't think of, people say the media's biased towards the coalition, this outlet's biased towards whatever. I can't think of any party that has gotten a easier run from every section of the media than One Nation is getting at the exact moment where they are becoming more radical and more powerful. I can't fucking take it, man. It's crazy.
And they have state presidents sharing stages with white nationalists. It's like, it's nuts. But I wanted to try and answer, Oz, the question of, why is Karl doing this? Why launch a new podcast with Pauline Hanson as his first guest right now? Because I do think there's something significant about this, and we may disagree on it. But I think that this kind of gets flattened by people based on their politics, right? Like, I've heard a lot of people on the left say, like, oh, of course, Karl Stefanovic, basically a shock jock, right wing, et cetera, and then I think you have people who maybe look at this and go, oh, Karl's a knockabout bloke. He's a bit of a clown. But he's a curious bloke. He's in the center. At the end of the day, he's a journalist. Like, are we really going to cancel Karl for interviewing Pauline, who is a politician at the end of the day? And both of those I do think kind of don't necessarily nail it to me. I think what's really happening here to me is that Karl is not really in the mold of your Alan Joneses or your Andrew Bolts, who are pure ideological warriors who are trying to win. This is a guy to me who is matey with people like Pauline Hanson, lots of liberal politicians and prime ministers, but he's also someone who has mates who are kind of quite cool progressive musicians and fashion designers, and he likes to swim in that world as well, and he can hang out with all these different people. And he's quite a chameleon who I think is very good at reading the public mood and capitalizing on it. And the significance of that difference, let me explain how he does this. Karl gave an exclusive interview to news.com to launch this new podcast, and it ran under the headline, Karl Stefanovic Defends Australia Day, Slams Woke Culture. And in it, he said, I think it's important for us to commemorate what has happened in this country in the morning, but then it's so important to celebrate where we are, who we are, and where we're going. Now, he says that today. What does that mean? What does that mean? But it runs under Defends Australia Day.
Yeah.
That's what he says today, now that he's trying to be Joe Rogan and One Nation is polling at like over 20%. Here's what he said back in 2017 when it was cool to want to change the date in a very solemn piece to camera on the Today Show.
As hard as some want to ignore it, January 26 marks a day this land changed forever for one of the oldest and most beautiful cultures in the world. To this day, mortality rates for Indigenous and Torres Strait Islanders are alarming. It wasn't until March 1962 the Menzies government finally gave the right to vote for all Aboriginal people. We look back at the horror of the stolen generation. Earlier in the 20th century, the White Australia policy, then we look at what happened in Tasmania. They are all facts and all incredibly painful. If we are to truly follow through with the apology and move forward together hand in hand, arm in arm, then I believe it must change. So let's do it together.
And so, Oz, from like a big public declaration about Indigenous rights and changing the date, when that is in vogue, to this week, slams woke Defends Australia Day, that to me exposes that this is a pure play to capitalize on the moment. That is what drives someone like Stefanovic. And I think in a way it's scarier actually when a guy like Karl embraces One Nation and embraces this rhetoric than when you hear an Andrew Bolt or whoever, because it's not an earnestly held belief. And this softball with Hanson could really be read as capitalizing and benefiting from the anti-immigration, dog whistling sentiment and racism that is out in the community and harnessing it for kind of benefit of the brand and benefit of this podcast, which is both so awful to do that purely for eyeball reasons and also a disturbing sign to me that if these figures in media who are more about reflecting the public mood are willing to swing in behind Hanson, that says to me they are reading the tea leaves and choosing that, and that's kind of scary.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's an element of him shifting his approach and what he says publicly based on the mood. But I think the only bit that I quibble with Scott is what are his earnestly or not earnestly held beliefs. Like I don't think he is like completely apolitical and kind of just going with the breeze. I think it's kind of pretty clear over the course of his career and what he says, where he sits, and occasionally like Rogan himself, he says stuff that can appear to go against the orthodoxy of the right, but kind of like Rogan, even though there are those moments that people cling to, the kind of net impact of someone like Karl as a media figure in terms of who he interviews, who he promotes, what he says, how he says it, who he chooses to push back on, who he chooses to launch his podcast with. I think the net impact of all of that has been to push the country in a more right-wing direction, even if, as you say, he's able to shift a little bit to make sure that he remains popular, because that's ultimately what his goal has been to remain on TV and make lots of money, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit more chameleon, but look, we can agree to disagree on that analysis. I think we're fairly close.
People wanted some disagreements. We've given it to them over Karl Stefanovic. Scott, just
I liked when he ate the spicy pie. I mean, maybe I'm too misty-eyed about Karl because of the spicy pie.
You also loved his joke he made to the Dalai Lama, one with everything. You loved that one, didn't you?
Make me one with everything. Oh, classic. Golden age of television.
Scott, just quickly before we wrap up this segment, just wanted to make a couple of quick points on One Nation's continued kind of rise. And I think this gets more and more interesting to discuss in the context of these interviews that she's doing with these big media figures, because they're clearly related. Like, it's not a coincidence that One Nation is increasing in the polls as they're getting blanket soft media coverage. There were 3 more polls out this week that showed One Nation ahead of the coalition. And I was having some conversations with some political science people, some journalists, some random people on the social media platform Blue Sky this week about One Nation's rise. And one thing I noticed is there was this like unwillingness from some sections of the progressive community, I guess, to really grapple with what is going on. There's this idea that One Nation, sure, they're polling well right now, but that's going to inevitably drop off as they pick candidates and the party falls prey to infighting as it has in the past. And I honestly think that is the case of wishful thinking. Like, it could happen. We're still a couple of years away from an election, but relying on some sort of inevitable One Nation collapse is, I think, a pretty poor, risky strategy. And it's worth just reminding ourselves that it's not happening in isolation. What is happening in Australia is part of something that's happening across the globe. People were in denial that Trump would win in America until he won. They're in denial that the far right and neo-Nazis could reemerge in Germany, of all places, until they did. They couldn't believe Nigel Farage could build a serious political movement until he did, and now he's in line to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. So these things can happen, and you can't just wish them away. One Nation's rise is very real. And yes, they are, according to basically every poll published in the last couple of weeks, on track to become the official opposition at the next election. And that really should stop surprising people, right? Like, whether it's Adam Harvey on 7:30, whether it's Karl Stefanovic on his private podcast, whether it's Paul Sakal at the 9 Papers, this is what happens when places like The Age, the ABC, the wider media get stacked with conservative types who don't really understand the role that they play in the political and media ecosystem. It's what happens when the media choose to give Hanson a leg up. It's what happens when Gina Reinhart decides to throw her support behind One Nation. It is almost inevitable. Like, it's almost so not surprising. We should just be seeing it as like the obvious outcome of all of these things.
Yeah, it's depressing how regularly the thesis that Australia is kind of downwind culturally from the rest of the world proves accurate. And I just think we're going to look back at this period with such the same recrimination as, you know, the British media was looked at after Brexit and the American media were looked at after Trump won. And it's like everyone can read their Maggie Haberman books and read all of that stuff and think they understand this, but it has not really been internalized in the way that we cover things. And I think unless something changes, you're going to see One Nation continue probably on this trajectory because there isn't really enough public scrutiny and like difficult questions being asked of them. That they're still treated as a curiosity and are like, what do these people think story, and not being treated like a serious contender.
All right, after the break, we're going to keep the political conversation going with a look at the Liberal Party's bumbling attempt at a leadership coup and break down the celebrity social media focused accounts having a great time with the Blake Lively drama. Scott, one of the consequences of following politics closely for the past kind of 10 or 15 years or so is that we've gotten to see a lot of leadership contests. And I've even managed to see a few of them up pretty close. But what is happening right now in the Liberal Party is going to be one of the most amateur efforts at this that I can remember. Like, immediately after the coalition split last week, Liberal Party figures, according to pretty much all the reporting, were united that Lee's days were numbered. Fast forward just a week, and now it's like not even clear there will be a contest, let alone who could emerge victorious from it.
Yeah, it's there's some practical reasons why a leadership contest hasn't happened yet, Oz. The Liberals aren't able to call a party room meeting until they're all together, and that's not scheduled until Parliament sits again next week, which is when we're likely to see one happen. But they could force a meeting. Like, they could force Lee to fly to Canberra. They could reconvene and do it. I think another issue with why this hasn't happened yet, but sort of seems to roll on with inevitability is the Liberals are just so devoid of talent at the moment, Oz. Like, there are so few factional heavy hitters left in the party who are able to, like, seize this moment, tell everyone what the hell they're doing and bring it on. And the longer this whole thing, like, rolls on without anyone taking control of that, the worse it is for the Liberals' brand and how the public see them, I think, Oz.
100%. And Scott, kind of more generally on leadership reporting or political leadership coup reporting.
Oh, I can't wait for this.
I find it really funny because I do enjoy reading a lot of it. It can be some of the most, like, you know, wacky and rollicking and gossipy and bitchy political journalism you get, right? But it is also, like, as far from rigorous, independent, quality, and, like, even ethical journalism as you can get. And what I mean by that is, you know, the general accepted norm in Australian political coverage is everyone is granted anonymity to talk shit about whoever they want, right? Any journalist will call up anyone vaguely associated with a leadership contest and say, what the hell do you want to say? You can say you're anonymous. I'll call you a senior source, and you can just tip a bucket of shit on your opponents, right? So that is, like, how the journalism side of it works. On the political side,
I love that side of it.
On the political side, right? Because it takes two to tango. Every politician being quoted has their own agenda they are shamelessly trying to push. So you have journalists being used by these politicians very aware that they can get away with saying whatever they want. It leads to, as I said, fun reporting, but, like, generally coverage that doesn't really add much to a really in-depth understanding of how politics works in this country. As well as all of that, Scott, you get these candidates coming up with bizarre ways to drum up momentum, because even though these
I love who has momentum. Who has the momentum today?
These are internal leadership battles being voted on by, like, I don't know, 50, 60 people, but they write about them and talk about them like they are on a general election platform. It's really extraordinary stuff.
It seems like the momentum has swung back to Susan Lee. It's just that she's, like, tumbling headfirst down a hill with that momentum. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. The moderates are allegedly sticking behind Susan Lee, partly because they don't want to reward the Nationals for blowing it all up, and partly because they're scared of the right. And the right in the Liberal Party, the Conservative wing, can't land on their preferred candidate between Angus Taylor and Andrew Hastie. So it's kind of this weird kind of limbo land at the moment. Of the two most serious leadership contenders, Hastie is the guy who's running this public I've got momentum campaign, which is leading to some really, I think, hilarious examples of weird leadership coverage.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite story so far, Scott, in all of this, by far, was a story by Sarah Eisen in The Australian. She wrote a yarn headlined, "Family Gives Andrew Hastie Blessing to Enter the Liberal Leadership Race." This is so funny. This is a news story. Ooh, yeah. Andrew Hastie has the support of his family. Ooh, is it his 3 children who's supporting him? No, it's his wife. Ooh, Andrew Hastie's wife is supporting him entering the leadership contest. What a story. What a yarn. What an exclusive. Well done to you, Mr. Hastie. How did you convince your wife that you should one day be the Prime Minister of the country? What an amazing story, Sarah Eisen. Well done.
I mean, I don't know, Oz, it could be harder for Hastie to whip his wife's support than you think. I mean, that woman's probably been through quite a lot. Do you know what their first date was, Oz? Are you across this story?
I don't know what their first... Was it him trying to seek her support to run for Parliament?
that would track. No, Ruth took Andrew on their first date. Tell me what you think of this as romance. Took Andrew Hastie to watch George W. Bush walk from the White House to a helicopter. That was their first date.
Wow.
Love is in the air.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible.
You're singing a lot in this podcast now, Scott. I'm into it.
Yeah, I'm trying to fit it in.
The best bit about this particular story, Scott, was that every single quote, and this goes for like most leadership stories, they're all anonymous, right? And in this instance, we didn't hear from Hastie or his wife, who allegedly supports him. The closest we got to either of them is someone written as a senior source close to Hastie, right?
Oh, the senior source says that the wife supports him.
Close to Hastie, right? And that source is reported as saying his wife is fully supportive of him, right?
Wow.
So unless these guys are like in some sort of throuple situation, like that source is either Hastie himself or someone who is like basically acting as a proxy so close to him, it literally might as well be Andrew Hastie. Like, what is the point of this? It's extraordinary. and the reason why I think it is so funny that they do all this anonymous stuff is because, like, the reason they do it is so they've got plausible deniability, right? So, like, if this all falls over and there's no challenge, Hastie can, like, honestly, actually not honestly, but Hastie can say with a straight face, hey, I never said anything publicly. I didn't fire the starting gun. It's not up to me what sources close to me say, right? But obviously, he and his allies are backgrounding the media. Like, where else would a story about his wife supporting him come from?
Totally. On the anonymous sourcing part of this, Oz, I feel like it can be really good when the journalist like maintains skepticism of the quotes they're getting anonymously, but when they're just like running them, it ends up in some weird spots. One that I found really funny was that over the weekend, pretty much every outlet ran their version of, we talked about this, the moderate faction are sticking with Susan Lee, with all these anonymous quotes. And the ABC version of this story quoted an anonymous MP saying, there's no move from moderates. They are rock solid. They're rock solid behind Lee Oz. That sounds so dramatic. Like the moderates are sticking together. Maybe Lee can hang on. This is all going back and forth. The seesawing factional war is in full flight. The thing is, Oz, the moderates have 16 people in a party room of 51. They are completely toast. Like those moderates sticking rock solid are virtually irrelevant in the outcome of this. And making this even funnier to me is that this report came 3 days after Phil Curry at the AFR had a moderate Liberal just like fully spilling the beans, saying they'd probably end up backing Angus Taylor because at least he's kind of a traditional hard right candidate, whereas Hastie is this new wave MAGA right that kind of freaks them out. So not that rock solid from that moderate. Like if we're doing the solid scale on moderate support for Lee, that's like closer to custard than rock, Oz, I'd say. And like so funny for that rock solid thing to come out after the Curry report. If the moderates are already caving and doing deals. Very funny.
It's so funny. It's so funny because like the moderates are rock solid behind Lee is obviously like Lee's camp. And by Lee's camp, it's probably like her office. And then everyone else are people who are just trying to scramble to like, this is just my point about every single thing here is being said with self-interest. And the main wash-up of it all, Scott, like whether or not there is a challenge imminently is, I just think it's pretty clear this party is very divided. Hastie is going to be a thorn in Susan Lee's side no matter what happens. And the kind of battle between them, it's just this kind of like tangible physical manifestation of the dilemma the Liberals are facing in terms of what direction they should go in. And I think kind of the funniest thing about all of that is, as much as Hastie is being described, even by other right-wingers, as this hard right guy, and he certainly is, right, in terms of his rhetoric and his approach, it's not like Lee represents a real kind of like left-wing vision of what the Liberals should be. Like she has totally fallen into this trap of trying to adopt Hanson light, One Nation light policies and rhetoric to staunch the loss of Liberal support. But it isn't working. So I kind of think like this is such a fake debate that they're having. Like whether they go with Hastie, whether they go with Lee, I just don't think the party's fundamental issues are going to be resolved. Coming up after the break, in keeping tabs, we take a look at the Blake Lively controversy and why the ABC's entertainment strategy is so bizarre, confusing, and downright dumb.
There's a lot of concern about disinformation and misinformation. Academics, researchers, as I call them, the eggheads, they're usually very worried about China and Russia and the far right and all kinds of scary people warping our online world. But I wanted to talk about another way this fills our feeds at the moment, and that is celebrity gossip. How across Oz are you of the nexus of kind of Instagram and TikTok celebrity reporters, sort of self-appointed reporters, and these accounts?
How across the nexus of Instagram and TikTok and celebrity reporting am I? What do you think I do all day, Scott Mitchell? What do you think I do all day? I'm more across these accounts than I would like to admit. You know, there's the interesting gossipy accounts like Demois, which I don't know, not to be one of those people, but like it was better before it blew up. I think now it's just like a worse version of old celebrity gossip sites, and there's so much stuff that is shared that's just like, we can't verify it. This is just an anonymous person in our account, but we're going to post it anyway because we need the engagement. One of the newer trends that I've really kind of enjoyed, even though I think it is also ludicrous, are these accounts that use lip reading or like AI to look at what celebrities are saying to each other on red carpets or at awards nights and sort of fill in the gaps. It is in a crazy like micro industry that has emerged around these celebrities at the moment.
Totally. And there's lots of like fun ones, and anyone who follows this stuff, there's good fun ones that definitely, like, if this is your jam, follow those. But one massive story over the last week that has kind of attracted the other kind of bad type of these accounts, I would say, is this big story around the Blake Lively text message publication. Oz, to catch everyone up who maybe isn't as across this as we are, the actor Blake Lively, whose husband is Ryan Reynolds, is suing Justin Baldoni, the director of her 2024 film It Ends With Us, alleging harassment and defamation, including the use of paid social media networks to spread kind of slanderous attacks on her. And Baldoni briefly countersued Lively and Reynolds, alleging they were defaming him. That suit was dismissed last year. Now, in Lively's suit that's going forward, a New York judge ordered the release of a bunch of the discovery documents, including text messages and emails, between some huge celebrities like Lively herself, Taylor Swift, Ben Affleck. And it's obviously like pretty rare for this private communication between stars to come out like this. So it's become a huge story in this world of TikTok, Instagram reporters. Very few people come out of it well. Oz, I'd say the one that's gotten the most attention is an exchange between Swift and Lively, where Lively kind of asks if everything's okay in their friendship, and Taylor responds, "I think I'm just exhausted in every avenue of my life, and in recent months had been feeling a little bit of a shift in the way you talk to me. Yes, there's been a lot of stuff, of the Justin stuff going on, and I've been through things like this before and know how all-consuming it is. It's more like, and I feel really bad saying anything about this because of your texts have been so nice in their intent, but your last few, it's felt like I was reading a mass corporate email sent to 200 employees." That is brutal, Oz, to a friend. Oof.
Yeah, I say this fully aware of how serious this may sound. If someone sent me a text like that, I would just kill myself. That is, if one of my alleged like close friends said reading your messages is like reading a mass corporate email, like that's brutal. Also, where is Taylor Swift reading mass corporate emails? Like, she never really had, like people like you and I worked in companies where you're getting these all-staffs and things. What? Taylor Swift is surely the one sending the all-staffs, to like Taylor Swift HQ. How is she aware of this concept? This flummoxed me.
That's a good point. Now, like, to get to the serious bit of this, of where this goes a bit bad, is there are celebrity accounts that are really taking over people's feed, where they sort of claim to expose the real story, uncover the conspiracy behind it, taking kind of tiny fragments of a story like this and blowing them up into some giant narrative. One such account, Oz, that I had a little look at was from this woman, Katie Paulson, in the US, who's on social media as Without a Crystal Ball. And she's made huge hay of this story, and in one post claimed that if Blake Lively was a man, she'd be called a predator for this, and go through the slides to find out. Now, she's clearly using language here about this story that alludes to pedophilia, to sexual abuse, and it's all based on photos of Lively holding hands with her 23-year-old co-star in this movie that the whole suit is about on the red carpet. Like, obviously holding hands with your co-star at a premiere doesn't mean you're a predator or prove that. But while looking at this, I found a pretty, glaring example of how bald-faced this kind of distortion for clicks of these stories are, which is that on the website of this account, if you go through the URLs, there's a disclaimer on Without a Crystal Ball. It says, "All information on this site is provided in good faith. However, we make no representation or warranty of any kind, express or implied, regarding the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, availability, or completeness of any information on the site." That is quite a disclaimer if you're claiming to be a reporter. That'd be
we
an
should
amazing...
add that at the end of our episodes, just in case people take us too seriously.
Like, incredible, right? And she added that to the site Oz after a defamation suit I found that was filed against her in 2020. That case was dismissed over kind of jurisdictional issues with the suit and where it was filed, but not before she deleted a bunch of the content it was over as soon as that suit came in, something her audience would be none the wiser about, would have no idea about unless they searched for those court documents. And I highlight it, Oz, because it might seem like small potatoes, but these accounts have become hugely popular. And to me, they're not innocent. Like, this kind of online theorizing, people being predators, the idea that celebrities are involved in this kind of stuff, uses the audience who's consuming that, they can kind of spiral into isolation, into obsession, into conspiracy thinking. And when that's your business model, even in the world of celebrity gossip, I think it's worth calling out and kind of alerting people to.
Definitely. And I think one of the other issues with how prolific and popular a lot of these accounts have become is people who are following them, they think that they've got the real inside story as to what is going on in a celebrity's head or who they're feuding with. And like, oh, you might have seen these headlines, but I actually know what's really going on because this account broke it down for me. Even though the facts that a lot of these accounts are basing their kind of stories and posts on are extremely dubious, and they are often running a particular agenda as well, either because they personally agree with a particular narrative or because they're being fed content by a certain camp to push a narrative, right? And as well as a lot of the funny, gossipy stuff that was in the Blake Lively texts, there was another part to this, which was kind of breaking down the anatomy of the PR campaigns that both sides were using. One part of this that has already been heavily reported is how Justin Baldoni enlisted a PR firm to manufacture this campaign targeting Lively. Some of the published messages that have now been released show exactly how that firm was operating and how staff working there were trying to enlist other celebrities like Jamila Jamil to kind of take part in it. On the other side, you've got these messages from Lively and Ryan Reynolds, her husband, showing them using their celebrity connections to push kind of their version of events, right? You broke down the Taylor Swift one. There are so many interesting emails involving Reynolds as well, and it's interesting following some of the smarter entertainment reporting coming out of Hollywood that kind of Reynolds is maybe taking some hits here because it is clear people have known for a while how he uses his clout and power to kind of pull strings behind the scenes, but seeing the language he uses is, I think, quite shocking and jarring to people. But that is the case for like executives as well. You've got Sony executives in these emails describing Lively as a fucking terrorist, accusing her of orchestrating drama in a unsavvy and amateur way. Reynolds is in emails describing Justin Baldoni as a human rounding error. He returns fire at these executives, calling them fucking textbook ineffectual elderly people. And like the reason why I'm bringing this up, I'm not trying to say that person is bad and that person in this debate is good. That's not like how I approach these things. I think it is pretty clear that Baldoni can act badly and inappropriate to Lively. She's allowed to protect herself and her reputation. But the kind of point of, and one of the interesting benefits of having all this laid out is you can see that everyone involved has their own agenda. They're trying to manipulate the media. They're trying to manipulate social media. There are all sorts of financial and personal factors here. You don't have to pick a side. Like so much of modern celebrity culture, including these accounts, it's about trying to get you to pick a side, whether that's in a dispute like this, whether that's in a breakup or relationship drama. Very rarely are there situations where one of these people is unequivocally bad and the other one is unequivocally good. I just think that is like my main sort of theory or thesis on all of this
Totally.
stuff.
And it is like a fascinating theory. Totally. And it is a fascinating example of media manipulation, even if you're not particularly invested in Lively and Reynolds and Baldoni. It is a fascinating lens with which to see the way that public discourse is nudged and manipulated.
Scott, last week I encouraged listeners of the show to check out the new ABC program hosted by Tony Armstrong, Always Was Tonight. I have to admit, when I plugged that show, I had assumed this was like a new ongoing like comedy series. You know, it was advertised as a satirical take on the headlines. When I think about that, I think about, okay, well, the headlines come out and then these guys will react to it. You know, I mentioned Tonightly, the last sort of younger, focused, satirical news show on the ABC. Well, imagine my shock, Scott, when I realized this was one 30-minute episode that was only going to air once a year. I was like, what is going on? Why have they launched this show, done all this media, gotten all these people together, created sets, created characters, done all this work to commission a one-off television program? I can't quite wrap my head around the logic of that. And I think what is also confusing to me is how it seems to be in contrast to how other figures or shows at the ABC are operating. It kind of like establishment ABC figures seemingly can just do whatever they want as long as they like. And even when someone like Sean McCullough finally is like, hey, I'm going to move on, it's time to make space for younger people, the ABC begs him to come back and then brings him back. And, it also seems like if you're Charlie Pickering, you can be entitled to your own weekly satire comedy show for as long as you're alive. But then if someone pitches a new good idea, they just get one 30-minute episode. And the show I thought was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was funny and sharp and quite, I think, impactful, particularly at the end. There were some rough edges, but I imagine that stuff would get worked out if you get an ongoing show to build up rapport, build up chemistry, figure out your rhythm, and work out the kinks. You've worked in TV, Scott, a lot more than I have. It feels profoundly dumb to do all of this for one episode, but is there a reason here? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you're not a moron for not realizing it was a one-off, because I believe in the upfronts late last year when they announced the new slate, it was just a new satire show hosted by Tony Armstrong. There was no description of how long it goes, and usually in an upfront, when you announce a new show, it's a season of a show.
Yeah.
So that, agreed, quite weird. And last year I wrote about this for the newsletter. I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast, but there are some very strange things going on in the way that the ABC reports its viewing figures. If you sort of read the annual report, you would see a decline in the linear broadcast audience, of course, a pretty significant one, but every year they sort of mention, but we made up for it in digital. If you actually look into the way that the digital stats are being counted lately, they're a completely different way than those stats are collected by the rest of the industry and the ABC 4 years ago. And it appears to me like they are not making it up in digital. So when you talk about your Charlie Pickerings, your Sean McCullough staying on the air, I think executives at the ABC would argue, oh, well, they're holding an audience, we can't be too risky. But actually, I think the audience is collapsing far faster than the ABC would like to admit. And in that context, why stick with the proven? I think it's really interesting, Oz, that despite a bunch of new shows announced, and I know people at the ABC are very optimistic about the new slate, very quietly, the ABC dropped the kind of most exciting new comedy that it had on last year. The ABC didn't make a whole lot of original comedy in the last couple of years, but they did produce one show, Optics, by Jenna Owen, Vic Zerfs,
yeah, great show,
and Charles Firth. Great show, got pretty good reviews, was off to a good start, and that was just quietly axed without an announcement, it seems, and won't be back. And it's just disappointing whether it's that show being quietly dropped without any sort of fanfare or acknowledgement as one of the only original comedies the ABC's made in recent years, and then you have Tony's show turning out not to be a show and a one-off special. You wonder what risk or chance the ABC is really taking to arrest the audience predicament they're in.
Yeah, I think not only should this show have been an actual show, I think with programs like Optics, that was good. It was nominated for a bunch of awards. It was a good example of them. And again, we're using this word risk-taking, like we both kind of use it in this. It's so not risk-taking.
Yes.
It shouldn't be seen as that. These people have been around for a long time. They're very funny. They got runs on the board. They've written films. They've won all sorts of awards. It's not risk-taking to give them a go. No. It's just common sense.
And also, and also to my point, when you are actually in terminal decline and not really acknowledging it, the bigger risk is doing what you're doing. That is the risk.
Exactly. Totally. And this idea, and this happened a bit with streaming shows internationally too, where places like Netflix would kind of commission a show for a season and then kill it. before it had a chance to kind of find its feet, develop an audience, or work out internal kinks. It's like, that's not how TV works. If you go back, you look at the first seasons of shows like The Office US or Parks and Rec or Community or whatever, all these shows that are so big, these big juggernauts that still stream and syndicate now, first seasons are often a bit wonky. I didn't even think the first season of Optics was wonky, but if you want it to be better, give those people time and backing to refine the product and grow. It just seems so crazy to spin these things up and then shoot them in the head so quickly. Really frustrating, really frustrating. I can't figure out what they think they're doing with their entertainment strategy. But Scott, literally as we've been recording this episode, there's been an announcement sent to all staff at the ABC about a brand new show that is coming out this year. It is not really an entertainment program. It is more of a news program. It is called the ABC National Forum. Now, Scott, I'm going to describe this program to you, and I want you to tell me if it reminds you of any other ABC programs.
Yeah, okay,
this,
can do.
According to the ABC's news director, Justin Stevens, is a discussion program that will bring together ordinary citizens, community leaders, experts, and policymakers to discuss topical issues of national significance. It will be held among a live studio audience. Remind you of anything?
Fisk? Is it Fisk? Is that what Fisk is? I've never actually watched Fisk.
Spin-off.
I've never actually watched it. It might be that. No, it's Q&A, which they've just cancelled.
They just cancelled Q&A. Now they've brought back Q&A, but they're doing it sort of ad hoc. It is incredible. I mean, like, good on them for clocking that show, as weird as it was, had this like important civic function to kind of play in society. I'm interested to see. I'm not going to knock them for announcing this. I think the ABC using its kind of unique relationship to the Australian community to try to like spark conversation, to have a kind of public forum, I think is good. It is interesting that the first discussion that will go to air sometime later this year, hosted by David Spears, will focus on anti-Semitism and the lives and experiences of Jewish Australians. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that Q&A, you'd imagine, obviously would have done, you know, in the aftermath of Bondi if it had been around. Interesting that is the topic that they're choosing to focus on straight away. It'll be interesting to see what other topics they get into as well. Q&A was great when it was weekly. This is now happening. We don't know how often. Maybe they'll end up doing one a year like with Tony's show, but I don't know. I don't hate the idea of this.
Yeah, I think my hope would be, I always thought Q&A should be more like SBS's Insight, which I think was a way better show, but just didn't get as many viewers because it was on SBS. But the good thing about that, if it really is a forum, if it was more like Insight where people went back and forth, there were more people who had actual connections to the story, who had experiences, who actually kind of got into it with the policymakers and the politicians and went back and forth. I think that created some really great moments where you had people going like, oh, you say it works. You say your policy works. I've been the one standing in line with my sick kid, and, you know, like, gives real accountability and pushback. My fear is that the thing that hamstrung Q&A, particularly in its final years, will continue, which is that the ABC, when it takes on these forum-style shows, is under so much scrutiny and is so paranoid about getting it right that it really controls and manages the interaction. And the audience member kind of stands up and reads a pre-agreed upon version of their question and the wording, and then they sit down and don't engage again, and it's back in the safe hands of the ABC host so that no one can really be offended or go off script. So that would be my fear, like both on this topic and just like the format.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are risks there, and the ABC is, as we've said, particularly scared of doing anything vaguely interesting or bold. But I will be curious to see how the show works, and I think we'll probably end up talking about it on our show when it does.
Sure will.
Scott, that is it from us for this episode of Lamestream. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left us a review or shared it with a friend. And you can email us questions or tips at contact@lamestream.com.au and subscribe at lamestream.com.au. Thank you to our producer, Bez. Thank you to our video producer, Schwen. Scott, have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you back here on Monday.
See you Monday, Oz.